I have a friend who works in Wisconsin at a transgender center. We were talking on the phone one night, and she said, I can always tell transgender people. And I thought she meant, by the way they look. And she said, no, they just always look afraid. I just look for the people that look scared, that look petrified for no reason. And they're probably transgender, which is really a horrible statement of how we treat people in our society. Are there any other questions? No? Has anybody here had interaction with somebody who's transgender? Yeah? Wow, a lot of you. And are they able to answer your questions? Yeah? Were they able to answer your questions beyond just themselves? Yeah. Very often, that's why I got into training, doing this stuff, and doing the research that I did, was because I found the information was very POV, point of view. And so if you're talking, it's like Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner can answer for Caitlyn Jenner. She can explain Caitlyn Jenner, but that doesn't explain me. Or, probably very many transgender people. Not everybody is binary. She would be considered binary female. But I find so much that the training being developed or the things being talked about is simply from that person's point of view versus trying to explain the entire thing. That's why I go through this, because that explains it. Yeah.
So what is binary?
Binary would be either, it's your thought process, it's your psychology. Binary is either male or female, and nothing else. Genderqueer would be a blending of the two, and then gender fluid is a moving back and forth. Now, gender fluid, that's a hard concept to wrap your head around. Does anybody know anybody that's gender fluid? Yeah? It's a hard concept for me to wrap my head around because there's not consistency in it. It's like, really? Kind of moves. And somebody who's interested in psychology, that's a difficult concept to come up with. But I've never experienced the male gender either, and I know it exists. So I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, because I've talked to enough people that have described the exact same things. Yeah.
So from an RA perspective, let's say a resident came up to us and said, I think I'm going through something, I don't really know what to do, other than providing assurance that I can take you to counseling. In your opinion, what would be the ideal situation for us as RAs to do?
Well, support. Be supportive. Yeah, absolutely. For anybody, anybody who has come out of the closet about anything, all the closet is a secret that you're hiding behind. So for anybody to tell a secret to someone, it takes a lot of guts. You have to get up the nerve to do it. And so if you meet something negative, when now you've been brave enough to share that, it's devastating. It really is. And it really kind of throws you back in the closet when you get those things. So if somebody comes out to you, know that they're offering their trust that you're not going to stomp on them. As far as what they need, then they would really have to, it takes a lot of self-reflection. And I'm really trying to get this concept more and more within psychology, because a lot of psychologists don't even understand this, quite honestly. They're taught something different. They're taught something more Freudian school versus what I'm teaching. But if the psychologist understands this concept, what we're looking at doing then is creating a treatment plan for that individual. Here's another thing too. Right now, if you were to walk into a psychologist's office and say, I'm transgender, there's usually this preconceived notion of what that means. And within the reason that the orchiectomy isn't seen as a treatment for me is because they've said, well, this is the treatment for transgender people. So if you come in and say, I'm transgender, they stick you on a conveyor belt, basically, as far as a treatment. And say, you have to go to counseling, you have to go to HRT, you have to get surgery. And we've really set this up as the only viable option. But it shouldn't be. I shouldn't have to have surgery if I don't want it. You know? But it's shocking to me how many times that I've had people in the mental health and medical communities say, just go ahead and get the surgery. It's covered now. Isn't it easier? Really. It would just be easier to have that invasive surgery that I don't want. But what we're doing is we're saying that, well, we need to make you acceptable again. You were acceptable if we saw you as a gender of male and you had a male body. You were acceptable at that point. But now you're telling us your gender is female. Well, now you need to have a female body or you're not acceptable to society. And that's basically what we're telling people. And this is keeping people from seeking treatment very often because it's a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be tailored to the individual. Margaret?
So I have a friend who's transgender, and she,
Yeah.
One thing I hear from her a lot is that she feels like she's fetishized, and that is how people look at her once they find out.
That label is put on her? Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Do you find that happens with you?
Yeah. I just started with a new psychologist. And I have fun with psychologists because I get to teach them. But I had asked her the first time we met, do you have any other transgender patients? She's like, oh yeah, we have a guy who's a cross-dresser. And I was like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about then, do you? Because that's where the fetish comes into, and that's what leads back to being transgender seen as a sexuality again. Because, and this might be a little bit uncomfortable to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway, because it needs to be talked about. I'm not saying that cross-dressing is bad. I'm not going to say that. Within sexuality, so everybody okay if I talk about sexuality for a second? Within sexuality, in order for a person to achieve orgasm, we all develop a fantasy. Every one of us. It's very rare that you're sleeping with a guy and he doesn't turn into Chris Hemsworth at the last moment in order to get over that peak. We all develop some sort of fantasy in order to achieve orgasm. Now, what's considered a fetish is when that fantasy becomes externalized. And that's all cross-dressing is. It's an externalized fantasy that can develop at some point and then just becomes more and more.